My name is Margaret Hale, and on the day I met my daughter-in-law's family for the first time, I chose to wear my oldest coat, the one with the loose button and frayed sleeves. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I stood in front of the mirror that morning longer than usual. My hair was pulled back simply, no jewelry except a small silver chain I'd owned since my 20s. I looked ordinary, almost invisible. That was exactly the point. My son Daniel didn't understand. "Mom," he said gently from the kitchen doorway, "you don't have to do this. You can just be yourself." I smiled. "I am being myself, sweetheart, just a quieter version." Daniel sighed, the way sons do when they know their mothers have already decided something. He had always been like that, kind, observant, too trusting of people's intentions. It was one of the many reasons I worried about him, and the reason I had made this choice. Daniel was marrying Emily, a beautiful, intelligent young woman from a family that lived very comfortably. Her parents, Richard and Susan Whitmore, were well known in their social circles. Country clubs, charity galas, private schools, subtle arrogance dressed as confidence. They had suggested we all meet at an upscale restaurant downtown. Suggested, but it felt more like a test. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat at a small table near the window. The restaurant was elegant, all soft lighting and quiet confidence. I noticed the glances from the staff, polite but curious. My coat didn't quite belong there. When the Whitmores arrived, they arrived together, polished, smiling, perfectly rehearsed. Susan noticed me first. Her smile flickered for half a second, just enough. "Oh," she said softly, scanning me from head to toe, "you must be Daniel's mother." "Yes," I replied warmly. "Margaret, it's lovely to finally meet you." She shook my hand lightly, as if something might rub off. Richard gave me a brief nod. "Pleasure." Emily hugged me genuinely. "I'm so glad you could make it, Margaret." Daniel squeezed my shoulder. "Everyone's here." We sat. Conversation flowed easily at first. Wedding plans, venues, guest lists. Susan spoke about flowers that had to be imported from Europe. Richard mentioned his golf club memberships. Emily listened politely. Daniel stayed quiet. And me? I asked simple questions. "Oh my," I said at one point, eyes widening slightly. "A destination wedding sounds so expensive. Is that common?" Susan smiled. "Well, in our circles, yes." I nodded slowly. "Of course, I wouldn't know much about that." Something shifted at the table. Richard leaned back. "So, Margaret, what do you do?" I hesitated, deliberately. "I've worked here and there, nothing special, just enough." Susan tilted her head. "And Daniel's father?" "He passed away years ago. We didn't have much after that." Emily reached for my hand. Susan didn't. The waiter arrived. Susan ordered without looking at the menu. Richard ordered the most expensive steak. Emily glanced at Daniel. I looked down at the menu, pretending to calculate. "Oh dear, these prices." Daniel immediately said, "Mom, order whatever you want." Susan smiled again. "Yes, please, don't feel uncomfortable." Uncomfortable. Interesting word. "I'll have the soup," I said kindly. "That's plenty." I noticed it then, the looks exchanged between Richard and Susan. Subtle, quick, judgment dressed as concern. They had already decided who I was. A poor, simple woman, someone to tolerate, not respect. Someone whose presence was unfortunate. As dinner continued, Susan asked Emily about her career plans. "Of course," Susan said, "we expect Emily to focus on her passions. Financial stress won't be an issue." She glanced at me. "We believe stability is important." I smiled. Oh, absolutely. Daniel has always been such a hard worker. He learned early not to expect much. That wasn't entirely untrue. Daniel looked at me surprised. He didn't know the full story. He never had. Dessert arrived. Susan declined. Richard checked his watch. Well, this has been enlightening, Susan added. We're glad Daniel found someone compatible. Compatible. Emily frowned. Mom, it's fine, Susan said quickly. We just want what's best for you. I stood slowly, smoothing my coat. Thank you for dinner. It was educational. Susan smiled tightly. Of course. As we walked out, Daniel whispered, Mom, are you okay? I looked at my son, the boy I had raised alone, the man who had no idea who his mother truly was. I'm perfectly fine. Because the truth was, this was only the beginning, and the Whitmores had no idea what they had just stepped into. They thought they had measured my worth in one dinner, but soon a single invitation would force them to confront a truth that would shake their pride, their reputation, and their daughter's future. The invitation that made them uncomfortable. The morning after that dinner, I woke up calm. That usually meant trouble for someone else. Daniel had already left for work when I made my coffee. I stood by the window of my apartment, modest, clean, intentionally unremarkable. The kind of place people stop noticing once they decide who you are. I let them. My phone buzzed. A message from Emily. Margaret, I hope you're okay after last night. My parents can be a lot. I smiled sadly. Don't worry, dear. I've dealt with worse. That part was very true. An hour later, my assistant called. Yes, Mrs. Hale? I need you to send out an invitation, I said. Something small, family only. Location. I paused. The lake house. There was a brief silence on the other end. Understood. The lake house. A place even Daniel had only visited once, when he was 15. A place I rarely spoke about. A place that carried both memories and leverage. That afternoon, I called Daniel. I'd like to host dinner next weekend, I said. Your in-laws, too. He sounded surprised. Mom, you don't have to. I want to, I said firmly. It's important. He hesitated. Are you sure? My place isn't big, but... I'm not talking about your place, I said gently. Another pause. Where then? The lake house. His breath caught. You still own that? I smiled. Some things, Daniel, you never sell. The reaction. When Emily told her parents, their reaction was exactly what I expected. A lake house? Susan scoffed. Whose? Margaret's, Emily replied. Richard raised an eyebrow. Your future mother-in-law? Yes. Susan laughed. That's unexpected. She said it's nothing fancy, Emily added. Susan waved a hand dismissively. Well, of course she would. Richard smirked. Probably a small cabin, rustic. They agreed to come, not out of interest, but obligation. And curiosity. The drive. The lake house was 2 hours outside the city, tucked away behind private gates and tall pines. The drive itself was intentional, long enough to build assumptions, long enough to get comfortable in them. Susan complained about the road. Richard checked the signal on his phone. This better be worth the drive, he muttered. Emily stared out the window, uneasy. Arrival. The security gate slid open smoothly. Susan frowned. Is this the right address? The driveway curved, long, clean, lined with manicured trees. Not wild, not rustic. Controlled. Richard sat up straighter. Then they saw it. The house wasn't loud. It didn't scream wealth. It whispered it. Glass, stone, clean lines, private dock, boats resting silently like obedient secrets. The lake stretched endlessly, reflecting the sky like a promise. Susan's mouth fell open. "Oh!" Richard said nothing. I stood at the entrance, dressed simply, the same silver chain, but a tailored coat this time. Still modest, still calm. "Welcome," I said warmly. Daniel looked around, stunned. "Mom, Come inside," I said. The cracks began. Susan's tone changed immediately. "Oh, Margaret, you never mentioned this place," she said, forcing a laugh. "I wasn't asked," I replied lightly. Inside, the house was elegant but restrained. No gold, no excess, just quiet authority. Richard ran a hand along the wood paneling. "This craftsmanship, it's original." "Yes, commissioned," I said. Susan swallowed. Dinner was prepared by a private chef, who greeted me by name. "Good evening, Mrs. Hale." Susan noticed. Richard noticed more. Conversation shifted. Suddenly, they were asking me questions. "How long have you owned this place? It must be hard to maintain. Do you come here often?" I answered vaguely. "A while. I have help. When I need to think." They were unsettled, not impressed yet, but uncomfortable. People like them hated uncertainty more than poverty. At dessert, Susan leaned in. "Margaret," she said carefully, "you never really told us what you do." I smiled. "Oh, I told you," I said softly. "I work here and there." Richard laughed politely. "You're being modest." "Yes," I said. "I find it useful." Silence fell. Emily looked between us, confused. Daniel was watching me now, truly watching. Something in his expression changed. As dinner ended, Richard stepped aside with me near the window overlooking the lake. "You know," he said quietly, "I may have misjudged you." I met his eyes. "You wouldn't be the first." That night, Susan would make a phone call she never thought she'd need to make. And by morning, a name from my past, one Richard Whitmore knew very well, would surface with consequences no one could stop.
The name that changed everything. Susan Whitmore didn't sleep that night. I knew she wouldn't. People like Susan could tolerate many things: inconvenience, embarrassment, even being wrong in private. But uncertainty? That gnawed at them, especially when it came from someone they had already decided was beneath them. At exactly 6:12 a.m., she made the call. "Do you know anything about a woman named Margaret Hale?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. Her friend on the other end paused. "Which Margaret Hale?" Susan's grip tightened. "The one with the lake house upstate." There was a longer silence this time. "Oh," her friend said slowly. "That Margaret Hale." A past that refused to stay buried. Decades earlier, when I was just 28, I buried my husband. People assume grief breaks you. Sometimes it builds you instead. My husband, Thomas Hale, had been brilliant, visionary, reckless in the way geniuses often are. When he died suddenly, his partners circled like vultures, convinced they could squeeze a young widow dry. They underestimated me. I didn't cry in boardrooms. I listened. And I learned. Within 5 years, I wasn't just protecting what was left. I was growing it, quietly, strategically. While others chased headlines, I built infrastructure, real estate, logistics, investments that didn't care about trends. By the time my name started appearing on documents that mattered, I had already stepped back. Power, I learned, works best when it doesn't need to introduce itself. The Whitmores dig. Susan's friend lowered her voice. Margaret Hale is private. Old money. Very private. Susan swallowed. How old? Before ours. Before most. Richard overheard enough to ask questions. Within hours they were digging. Records, donations, property trusts. Richard's hands began to shake when he recognized a foundation name, one he'd seen in negotiations that never went his way. The Hale Trust, he muttered. Susan looked at him sharply. What about it? They outbid us. Twice. Without even showing up. Susan's face drained of color. The dinner that followed. 3 days later, Susan requested lunch. This time, she chose the restaurant. This time, she arrived early. I was on time. Margaret, she said, standing quickly, thank you for coming. Her tone had changed. So had her posture. I'm glad, I replied. You sounded concerned. She laughed nervously. Oh, just thought we should talk. We ordered. She barely touched her food. Margaret, she began, I feel there may have been misunderstandings. I agree, I said calmly. She leaned in. You're not struggling, are you? I smiled gently. Susan, if I were struggling, you would never have known. Her lips parted. That was when she understood. Daniel started to see. Daniel noticed everything. My calm, their discomfort, the way Richard suddenly deferred instead of dominated. Later that evening, he confronted me. Mom, he said quietly, who are you? I looked at my son, the one person I had shielded from this world. Someone who learned the cost of being visible, I said. He shook his head. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I wanted you to be loved for who you are, not who I am. His eyes filled. Emily listened from the doorway, heart heavy. I'm sorry, she whispered. I held her hand. This isn't your fault, but it will affect you. The threat. That night, Richard tried to regain control the only way he knew. He made a call. To someone who owed him a favor. To someone who once sat across a table from me and lost. The man listened quietly. Then he said, Richard, if you're smart, you'll stop. Richard laughed. Is she really that dangerous? The man exhaled. She's not dangerous. She's inevitable. The line went dead.